This is a podcast which does not shy away from difficult and vulnerable topics. The content is of an adult nature and we do swear at times.
Welcome to the Autistic Licensed Podcast. I'm Siana and I'm in Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland.
I'm Leo in London.
We invite you to listen in on our conversations as we experiment with unmasking in an autistic space. We talk about what it means to discover we're autistic as adults, especially with established careers as therapists. We want people to know that autistic therapists exist and to broaden the conversation about neurodiversity. You're so welcome to join us, whoever you are and wherever in the world you are. We hope you'll find something of interest and connection here. Good morning, stroke afternoon.
Just about afternoon.
On Saturday, the first Saturday in January, 2025.
Welcome to 2025. Happy New Year.
If you count this as the new year.
Yeah, that's true.
For some people, there's all sorts of New Years, aren't there? And in some ways, it makes sense to be like spring as the new year.
Yes, I would agree with that. That's what normally feels like a new year.
For you, is that what feels like a new year for you?
Yes, it does. This feels quite arbitrary, actually, because there's not a change, as you know. In fact, winter seems to have shifted along a little bit, actually. It's almost like the beginning of winter.
Oh, because of the weather? Is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, but generally speaking, that seems to be how it is at the moment. And in this part of the world, the really cold part, it normally starts about now these days.
Yeah, it's been icy here. Definitely been colder than it had been before. So I can see your point. I think it's shifted along, because for me, this is definitely when I would celebrate the new year, because I have that gap in between winter before and winter after, when winter after, as in at this point, is a enlivening time, whereas winter before, at the end, the close of the calendar year, is a much more low hibernation-y kind of a period.
What marks those two halves for you then of winter? Because there is the thing about the shortest day, and now that there's a pendulum swing very, very subtly in that the days then are now starting to get longer, which goes along with, I guess, what you were saying about brighter. A bit,
but it's not, for me, it's not like things change on the 22nd of December. They change more like towards the 31st to the 1st.
It really is a calendar thing.
Yeah, for me it is, and for me it always has been. And that might have been, I don't know whether it corresponds to certain people who are born at certain points in the year, whether it feels that way. I don't know. I've never had anybody to compare notes on about things like that. But for me, there's a shift in my energy that's undeniable, that happens every year.
And very predictable. You talked about it in advance.
But yes, because it happens every year, it's always very hard to believe. So it's, even though I've had decades of it, it always feels in December like, oh, is this going to be the year that it doesn't happen and I'm going to be stuck in this forever? But then invariably it does happen, and it's exactly the same whenever it's coming. So in October, it's like, maybe it'll not be like that this year, but then it does. I feel like maybe I have already talked about this, so I don't kind of want to be, I don't want you to ask me too much about it, because I feel like we've already covered it. So I'm more interested in your musings around how this doesn't feel so much like a new year, and what that's like for you, because we've not talked about that on the podcast.
I suppose.
We've not talked about that, actually.
No,
at all.
I don't. No, maybe not. When you're a kid, then there's or if you're a kid in this particular bit of the world and this culture, then there's a excitement about Christmas because that's presents, and so that does feel like a big marker, and it's different from birthdays because it's everybody. Everybody's getting and giving presents. That's the big focus, I think, for a lot of children. And so that I guess I've never thought about this before, but I guess that does build up a kind of milestone that is also just days away from a new year. And maybe again as a kid there's some excitement about that because the date changes. Well, for me, actually, yeah, let's go autistic on this. That autistically for me, that was significant, that a date changes, because I hold a lot of weight by, kind of numbers and marking things. And so that would have been a thing. There was some thrill about writing a new year. When you've had lots of them, I guess that novelty maybe wears off. So maybe that's why, or part of why, I don't feel a particular, change, shift, milestone, something, as much as I might do. And I hadn't thought about this until you mentioned it just now around seasons, that's more significant when something changes in the natural environment. That seems more significant. And I think I've really also shied away from the kind of the arbitrary nature of a date being significant and changing, like New Year's resolutions. I just don't think they're helpful for me anyway. It's maybe therapeutically as well, in the same way that I don't like to kind of, unless somebody specifically wants it, set homework, because these are all things that can just set you up for a horrible feeling of failure and shame. And I think New Year's resolutions is something like that.
Yeah. I know all that kind of, I've heard a lot of people talk about them in that way. I know when I was younger, I loved them. Like I remember in my teens, like being like, this is what I want to do. This is, and I remember it actually being really helpful in a immature self-help kind of a way. And I think that even though I don't frame them in that way, I have bought into that from a young age, and that could be not in a behavioral way. I don't put myself on diets or anything like that, but in terms of knowing what I want or what I feel is calling me into, there is that kind of awareness around this time of year, and there is a taking stock at the end of the year that just happens, that I don't have to put in my diary, or I don't have to say you're going to write these things down today. It just naturally happens, and so it's there, and that's something that culturally has probably been with me for a long time, that probably came from the idea of New Year's resolutions, but got made into my version of appropriating that, which I guess is what I've done with Christmas over the years, where, even just in our conversations the last couple of years, realising that at this point in life I do Christmas my way, and I take the things out of it that I enjoy and maximise on those. And so it's like not something that I dread. Whereas if I had to do it according to what the norms are, it would be something that I dread, because it would be parties and food and crowds and competition and all of that. And maybe that'd be the same as the new year. Like if I bought into it in the, you have to lose weight, or you have to join a gym, or you have to earn more money, or you have to whatever, and if the reviews were about those kind of things, like how much influence did you have, how did you get promoted, what did you achieve, then those things wouldn't work for me. So I guess it's the same. It's all been appropriated into what works for me over all of these decades to get here, but without throwing it out whole scale. Which I would have been tempted to do. There was years when I just wanted to throw out Christmas altogether, and I just don't do that. So I think that's happened.
Something then, I suppose what you were talking about originally about, what does New Year mean? What's the significance if there's a shift, when that is?
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about that has changed now that I suppose I experience, this will sound so obvious, but I suppose I experience a year, the seasons, whatever, as a cycle. So in other words, as just a continuum. Mm-hmm. Not with a particular moment where there's a switch over from an old to a new.
Yes.
Actually. And I wonder how much of that's been deliberate, if I've kind of trained myself subconsciously mostly not to hang such significance on arbitrary, what seemed to me to be arbitrary things, and maybe it is to do with that building up of unreasonable expectations or unfulfillable expectations. And maybe I've overdone that. That's a feeling I'm having as we're talking, that maybe I've
a
kind
defensive stance.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. I do wonder if I've done that. Yeah, but overdone so that now, it's like, I'm trying to think of another example of that. But, okay, something's kind of forming. If the risk that parts of me are defending against, if the risks are something to do with, building up your hopes or too much expectation or fear of failure for, setting expectations, and maybe I've gone too far with that, so that I've also kind of taken away some of the thrill and the joy of some of those arbitrary moments. And what's occurring to me is this has actually come up a few times in the work that I do with people, where somebody might be building up or resisting getting too excited. Let's say just an arbitrary thing, a new job, or gone for a job interview. It's a job they really want, and culturally maybe this is also quite a British thing too. Don't build your hopes up. Don't get ideas above your station. That kind of thing. But the logic is often, if I get too excited about this good thing and then the good thing doesn't happen, that's going to be so much more devastating.
Yes.
As if I just manage my expectations and push them down and don't, expect nothing and then everything is a bonus kind of attitude.
Yes.
But my argument for that recently has been, you're denying yourself quite a lot of potential joy, excitement. To what benefit does it really reduce the impact of failure or not getting the job by not enjoying the run up and fantasizing and getting excited? Does it really make that much of a difference? It's going to be, if it's to stick with the job analogy, if it is going to be so devastating because this is such a wonderful job and it was made for you and blah, blah, blah. I don't think it's going to make much. It's going to be it's going to be devastating if you don't get it, or it's going to be disappointing, or whatever the level of negative feeling you'll have. And in the run up to that, on top of that, you've denied yourself the joy and the excitement and the fantasy leading up. It's kind of the worst of both worlds, really. And I think there's more of a balance. There's something that needs to be, I think, in a lot of cases, adjusted back toward a little bit of excitement and anticipation. And that I'm linking to what you're talking about there with kind of significance and dates and new beginnings or a new year or whatever the high point or milestone is. And I do wonder if I've toned it down so much for similar reasons of, managing expectations or setting oneself up for failure with resolutions or whatever, that I've made it actually too mundane, and it is just this continuum cycle of a year, and I've lost something there, perhaps.
And I also think you're describing something that for autistic people, it has been maybe a familiar experience when we're younger of getting what might be deemed overexcited, and then this horrible feeling of disappointment that we don't want to feel the devastation. We don't want to feel the roller coaster. It's like, okay, if I have to go that high and then go that low, please just put me on a track that goes round and round in circles. And like, it's a very wise move at some points in our lives to curtail the possibility of meltdowns or burnout or failure or whatever. So I suppose I'm speaking to the wisdom of the part of you and other people that would decide that that's the best strategy to protect your mental health. One's mental health. I don't want to personalise it.
It is, but yes.
It's not, on a podcast. If I was working in therapy with you, I might say you. But, so, and if I make a comment without going into a therapeutic process, obviously, but if I make a comment from the point of view of me as a therapist using IFS, I might say that there is a part of you that has a protective role, and that's probably hypothetically related to experiences in the past that haven't been processed and recalibrated within you, that experienced how devastating it might have been to have worked up to something and then crashed. And maybe that's common enough experience, but it's just opening it up in a compassionate way, that if that protective part could be supported and not feel like it was all on it. Because sometimes that's what happens to us. We put a part in the steering wheel of our life on, we give a part the steering wheel when actually it's only a part, and it needs to step back and become part of a whole system, so that other parts sometimes run the show. Or the self in IFS terms runs the show rather than the parts. But the first step is making some of that conscious.
Yes,
maybe
exactly.
We're illustrating and now. And it's just another way of saying exactly what you said. Maybe I've done this too much.
Yes.
I feel like it's a compassionate way of saying it, because you haven't done anything wrong by making it too much. You've simply had a part that's come forward at a time in your life to provide a protective role.
And another side of that is understanding why that has come up. There are specifics around that. So, for example, for me, and I think a lot of other autistic and ADHD, maybe particularly boys even, that there's this thing about don't get overexcited, calm down, stop making such a fuss. So that we, that is also a source of shame for a start. Yes. Obviously I look ridiculous because I'm jumping up and down and I'm excited about this thing, or I won't shut up about it, that kind of stuff. Maybe I shouldn't have gendered that, but there was just an instinctive thing that I know that there's a stereotype of how little boys will express that side of themselves, and that can also get repressed and then masked because it's too much for other people, or it marks you out again as weird. Nobody else is getting this excited about
it's
that
exposing
thing.
Yeah.
So there's another reason, I guess, not beyond the practical of like expectation management or avoiding feelings of failure, around toning down, again, as we're saying, maybe too much or leaning too far over into one part, that then you lose, I think I do feel I've lost some of that unnecessarily, that for no actual benefit, really. Like I was saying before about in the here and now,
maybe in the here and now,
not historically, for good reason.
That it was adaptive at a time, but maybe it needs to be looked at.
Exactly. And as you said, then this conversation is part of that, is that process of bringing it out in front, so that, I can look at it and think, well, maybe that's not useful, or maybe there's something to be enjoyed there that's gone for the moment. Yes.
And how I've kind of always done by and large, done this kind of process is in a very private way. So it hasn't been in a, like, here's what I'm going to do, telling everybody, and then being able to be evaluated on it, or here's what I want, or here's my reflections, or it's never been very public. And I guess that's then kind of spared me from any of the exposure and the evaluation. And so that meant that I maybe didn't need to develop a protective strategy around it. Because it was just like, as a teenager, it was writing in my diary, you know, and there's various iterations of that over the years. And I also feel like, though, when you said about being toned down, I have felt for many years like I am toned down in January out of sensitivity to the fact that the majority of people I come across are hating January. So many people are like, oh, January's such a long month. I don't have any money. I hate January. If only it would become, you know, it would move on for the year. I'm booking my summer holiday. You know, and I always felt like I had to hide the fact that I was in good form. And I still joke about that sometimes. I still will like say, oh, I can get quite unbearable in January. And the truth of it is that I won't get unbearable because I'm so sensitive to other people that I won't put that on other people. But that just kind of speaks to the censoring that's gone on, because I have known that if I'm actually out as me in January, it won't be very acceptable, or it'll mark me out, or it'll get attention that I don't want. And then as well, it would get exposure, because of course I don't know what's going to happen. And of course I'm not actually setting myself any time frames for the year. That's not at all what I'm talking about. But that's not what any of this is about for me. So it's suited for me for it to be private and be hidden. And yet the downside of that as well is that there's kind of a invalidation of it, or more hiding, you know, because it's just not socially acceptable to be up in January by and large.
And that's the flip side of what you spoke about in our Christmas episode, I think, you know, about saying, well, I'm not dreading it, talking about Christmas, and that being unacceptable because you weren't being joyful enough. You know, you were daring to use negative language, even though it was still positive. But the word dread, exactly. Yes, that's right. That to those people in the hairdressers wasn't acceptable.
Not the hairdressers, the dentist.
The dentist. Sitting in a chair having things done to your head. That place. So. Where's the point at which you just get to, you know, express how you're experiencing a season or a moment that why does it have to be in tune with, you know, what everybody else is telling themselves that they are experiencing? Because I don't believe that is
that they're all
universal. No, how can it be?
Yeah, it opens up a much wider thing around how do we give voice to things that are different to other people, and all just hold that together, which is part of what's going on in my circle training, you know, and the differences between that and therapy, and being a responder as opposed to someone who can also join and offer my voice, even though it's different, and no matter how that affects other people. Because I've always censored and adapted myself to fit with how the other person might perceive, or to be helpful in my responses.
That's right.
Rather than just kind of say what I need to say, which is my authentic truth. And also allow people to be responsible for how they receive that, which is a shadow side of it that I'm looking at. You know, why do I not let other people be responsible for how they receive me? Why do I take responsibility for that? Obviously, I'm not talking about therapy here. We have a role in therapy. I'm talking about in the world. That I feel an over-responsibility to, have felt an over-responsibility to adapt, which again, of course, is another one of those protective parts that came online very early and was a really good strategy to get me through life, but may not serve me in this, my 50th year. I feel a sense of a part of me that wants to apologise to the listeners that they might hear about my 50th year quite a number of times this in 2025. And so might a lot of people around me, and that might be me taking up space in my reality. You know, that's just what it is, and it's something that's important to me.
Exactly.
And even though other people maybe not. I have a couple of friends I've talked to, and talked to my aunt as well, who remembers being 50, and they're all kind of, they didn't resonate with, oh, it's so exciting to be in your 50th year, but for me, it is exciting, and I am saying it, and I'm going to be interested in the different reactions to me saying it. I said it to my little nephew, and he said, "That's so old." And I said, "Yes, it is. Isn't it great?" Hello, Siana here. I just listened to this again, and we missed an opportunity to link what I'm talking about to autistic masking and unmasking. So it's a really good example of the organic nature of the unmasking process. So as a child, as a young person, I developed a really good strategy of not being seen and hiding my difference. And I did that by listening to other people, by looking for their cues, by responding in acceptable and helpful ways, and in the process covered over who I was and my authentic self, which continues and continues to this day. And the process of unmasking is not one of, oh, just show yourself, and, you know, once you know what you're doing, then you start to reveal yourself more, because of the decades of time and energy that's gone into it, and the many, many, many layers of it. And how a lot of it is unconscious, and we don't even realise that we're doing it. It becomes so utterly ingrained in who we are.
So there's a thing where you have this arguably arbitrary number that has significance for you, and you're doing the other thing that we were just talking about, which is experiencing the joy and the excitement and the fantasizing or whatever in the lead up. But, you know, it's also not a lead up for you. You are talking
it's
about it.
It's not a lead up.
It's
not
this
about
is
my
your
birthday.
50th. Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
My birthday may not even be marked in any way. That's not what this is about.
Yes.
It's not like, you know, I'm going to plan something for my birthday. It's like, this is my 50th year, and that's the significant thing. What is going to happen in this transition process of this year? So that is very different, actually. It's not about a 50th birthday. It's about the 50th year.
And has that been a marker in your head for a long time?
My 50th?
Yeah. Has that had a significance?
It's an interesting
Is it as you arrive at it, or has it been something that maybe has been has had some kind of profundity in your consciousness?
Yeah, I think it has been a developing one, because I can recall some conversations a few years ago with a couple of close friends separately, and, you know, maybe like on a few occasions, when the gist of it from them was that they didn't want to be getting older, that we were losing something by our age.
Right.
And, you know, something around as well, you know, being in perimenopause and what that means, and moving towards that stage of life. And me being like, I want to get to my 50s. I feel like I really want to be in my 50s. I'm ready to move out of this and into something else. And this is what I'm looking forward to. So I can remember that being there. I don't think it was like so connected to my 50th year at that time. I think it was just in my 50s. So something about actualising in my 50s in a different way. And I think that was to do with really charting, you know, having been in middle age from maybe early 40s, maybe about 40, 41. And then understanding the process of menopause, and which was coming for me in my 50s, but perimenopause, but also that change of life and that kind of moving from the mother era, and not necessarily mother era as a biological mother, although for me that coincides. But coming out of that into, you know, something different where, of course, for me, even just in terms of my lifestyle and my flexibility, as Lana gets older, then that opens up more possibilities for me in my 50s, because I'll not be organising myself around her needs and her schedules. Well, I might be, who knows? I don't necessarily have the crystal ball on that, but not as much one would hope. not as it's not going to be arbitrary. I'm not one of these people that says when she's 18 she's on her own, but I know that my 50s will be different than my 40s in terms of being a parent.
And while you're accepting that you don't know, you don't have the crystal ball, you are absolutely allowing yourself to enjoy set some of those expectations with flexibility and look forward to it. And again, just the way that we're talking about how I've maybe, again, lent away from that. Because it has literally just occurred to me as you've been talking about your, you know, expectations or hopes or imaginings and fantasies about what your 50s will mean to you, and why it holds a profundity for you and has done in a way that's built up. I don't think that happened for me. I think it was this very big landmark birthday that everybody else seemed to think was significant and should be marked in a very serious way. And I actually had to fight quite hard to stop a very big, autistically really uncomfortable, you know, kind of gathering and landmarking of that moment, and successfully, thank goodness, in a way that would have been easier knowing the labels that I can use of myself to justify some of those needs. But yeah, as you were just talking about it, I was thinking, well, I will often say that, you know, most aspects of me, the aspects of my identity are different to they were X number of years ago. But actually, listening to you go through all of that, it occurs to me for the first time that that's all in my 50s. And that would have started with my training, which started in my late 40s. But I actually started my practice in my 50th year.
Oh,
neither did I. You see, I hadn't because I've become so anti-arbitrary dates marking things. I just hadn't linked those two things together. And I had a very difficult health year that year, which, you know, ended with me being in hospital with pneumonia, and that firming up my plans to do something about my health. So the following year was my weight loss surgery year, which was, you know, obviously really a radical change, and that changed my well-being, my physical health, but it also changed how I looked to other people, and that was not the purpose of doing it. But because I did get responded to differently by people in those following months and years, that did something for my self-confidence, and the training does that too, or it can do. You know, you understand more, and you can identify things that might be problematic for you that before were invisible, and that's also part of that. And then starting my practice, which went well from the beginning, and that also kind of boosted other threads of my identity and my sense of self being more solid. And at that same time, actually, that was the time when my identity from childhood at my core had been as a dad in waiting, a father in waiting, that I was going to have children, and that didn't happen. And that's probably the most difficult part of all, because it's not something that I would have chosen to have changed about my identity, but it was in those early years of my late 40s and early 50s again, where a lot of my therapy was about that part of my identity and how that could shift and change and become something else. And, you know, for example, I was aware during my training and my early years in practice that there were people that I would work with who would, you know, obviously all subconsciously for both of us, you know, pull on my paternal parts. And so it wasn't even a straight shift of, you're going to be a dad, all right, you're never going to be a dad. But rather that some of those parts were able to kind of find a different direction or output or use. You know, that I'm not framing as a positive or a negative. It's never something I would have chosen to, you know, that's not a part of my identity I would have chosen to have changed. But at least it wasn't just this, as I was saying before, this on-off switch thing. It was just a redirecting of some of those needs and abilities and parts into something that felt good. So there's, yes, something about when something is unresolved. So, you know, you're waiting for that thing to happen or to get to that part of life, which you always imagine is kind of inevitable and is the thing that you want. If that, while you're waiting for that to happen, whether it happens or not, that is, for me anyway, that's not a source of confidence. You know, the unknown is shaky for me often. So in other words, when you say, okay, that thing is not going to happen, or that's not going to be part of my identity, there is relief in that, even if it's not what you chose, or even if it's quite devastating. There is still relief in knowing at least your identity can form around something or the absence of something, rather than just sitting there waiting for the shift, for the thing. And then, of course, the crowning identity shift of being neurodivergence, which was just a couple of years after that. So, you know.
Yes.
So that's so much of who I was 10 years ago compared to what happened in the first chunk of my 50s. And really, you know, there was a significance, and I don't think I'm kind of overplaying it to fit in with this conversation, but if I do think about my 50th year, that was a turning point. It was significant and profound and made a real difference. Yes.
And all of that is the work of middle age. My middle age process would have started around 41, I'd say. I had some real crisis-y change of life kind of stuff, more like, and that would have been when I was in really chronic burnout as well. And then I remember like there being like 2018 just being a shit show, but in like a way of like, this is just meant to happen. It all just has to die. It all just has to be ashes. In fact, I think that there was a few years, that was the beginning of it. And I had this dream. That was when I first learned about the phoenix and it having to die and then rise again. And like the whole symbolism of that, and realising that I had just crashed. And that was when I like really, for the final time, sort of, you know, walked away from everything Christian and things. I mean, I had been, there was years before that, but, you know, that was the real deal breaker year. And, like I remember there was just this image that I had, and it was basically of just like the apocalypse, but I don't mean that in a religious way. I just mean that my life was just burned down. And like there was this not this thing that was like, in fact I might have even been able to find, I think there might have been like it's wrong to say meme because that trivialises it, but some kind of an image, and it just said not this. And I remember getting to the end of that year and just being like, all I know is that I don't want this. And I think that in some ways I've been emerging from that ever since. And so for me, actually, to go back to the thing that I said at the beginning of being focused, and that I have a different idea of it than what you've described, of it being like layers and confidence and things like that. For me, it's been just trying to live in tune with what seems to be inviting me in, but without any woo-woo about that. Like there's no manifestation going on here.
I know.
It's just that I then feel like there's an invitation into something or other. But I think that that's also been the way that I've, taken all sort of decisions. I've waited to kind of be like for something to seem like it's the right time. And I think that having been in the therapy world, as I have from relatively young, the benefit of that and the benefit of such wide reading and theorising meant that by the time I got to my late 30s, I knew that theoretically I was entering middle age. So I was reading Carl Jung, and I was reading that he was saying this. And so even though people around me were thinking, oh, we're still young, we're not 40 yet, I was going, no, we're going into middle age, And so I already had this template. There was an acceptance, there was an expectancy, there is going to be a shift, and it's going to be gradual. And I started my training. When I did my Jungian sand play, I was early 40s. So it was midlife beginning, and some of that coincided with the things I've been talking about. I also am part of a generation of women who, I know that perimenopause and menopause is still not talked about enough. But if you go 10 years earlier, people weren't talking about it at all. No one even knew what perimenopause was. But we now know, and it's relatively recent because we have books and high profile people like Davina McCall talking about it and drawing attention to this period of, up maybe 8 years for some of us, when we are in perimenopause, we are in this transition. The very fact that I just say that, and I say that to a man, it just is what it is. But 10 years ago, no one was talking about that. So women were going through what they were going through in their 40s. And not understanding what it was. So I had all this theory. I knew that I was in a process that could be over a decade long of middle age and of perimenopause. And I knew that that's what it was about. I had that template. From what you describe, you didn't have that template. No one told you when you were 38 that you were entering middle age and that there were some tasks that in order to be a healthy, healthy development would mean that you would need to confront certain tasks of actualization in order to come out healthy into your 50s and into the next stage of life. So you came on it, you were attracted to the counselling career, that you went into therapy, it accelerated some of this process, it allowed you to look at things. I don't want to perpetuate stereotypes, but we all know the trope of a man in his 50s who hasn't done his work and has a crisis, and it's commonly called a midlife crisis, even though he's actually beyond by that stage. We all understand this concept of someone who's run away from themselves and has run away from their disappointments and has run away from the interpersonal work that he needs to do. And then he, has a breakdown, he goes off the rails, he abandons his family, whatever it is that he does, it's commonly understood and it's seen as a crisis, as if it's a one-time event. But actually it's because the process of going through that transition hasn't happened and comes to a head. And I'm also not saying that it only happens to men. It's just that's a stereotype sometimes in our culture. And so what you describe is the work of middle age, even if in advance you didn't know that you had that task. Just the same way as adolescence has certain tasks and early adulthood has certain tasks and middle childhood has certain tasks. There's tasks of midlife and middle age.
So when I think of that stereotype, it's usually kind of existential. It's a realization of being more than halfway through your life. It's a realization that I'm mortal, or that, and it's that kind of thing, again, that enhances that stereotype, or is often part of that. Now, that bit, and I think this, for me, is an autistic thing. I didn't have that.
No, not at this stage. You did that
because I did that when I was
6.
Exactly. Yes, right. I contemplated the infinite, and came to terms with the nature of mortality. And at an age where I didn't know, nobody at that age has a brain that can cope with that. But that's when I used to refer to that as I was growing up, and I had my midlife crisis when I was 8. In the terms that normally, I think, trigger a lot of people, maybe especially men, to midlife crisis, which is about that, it's later than you think. Oh my God, I've wasted my life. And, I never thought about the fact that I'm going to get old and die, but I did do all of that. Really bad. I mean, that was not a good experience. It's not a recommendation, but it's it's the major thread that I think does drive a lot of those crises and ongoing crises for people that I haven't had to deal with in that way. So for me, then, it got kind of quite neatly, again, in an autistically friendly way, compartmentalized into these individual strands of my identity that I can name and talk about now. And I don't know what I could have, other than knowing much, much earlier that I'm an autistic person. I don't know what preparation or work I could have known to do. Not that I couldn't have done, but that I could have known to do to prepare for those shifts. Whereas I think
knowing they were coming, maybe. Just knowing that this is I just like that template of developmental milestones.
Yes.
It just makes sense to me. But yes, I hear you. But I think that you didn't have, like, some people wouldn't have done them and they would just be terribly depressed at this stage.
And not know why.
Full of loss. Or, well, that didn't happen for me. Why did that not happen for me? Because I don't know that it's always an existential thing with people. I think that for some people it's just a sadness and disappointment. I haven't made it in my career. I haven't had children and I wanted to have children, or I haven't got the house that I thought I would have, or the money that I thought I would have, or something that they thought. Although, I hear you that some people it might be it's the existential.
Or at least that's the focus of it. And,
or that's what's acceptable to say.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, that's
say?
Interesting.
Yeah. And because maybe it sounds very pitiful. People feel like they don't feel able to say, "Oh, poor me, I haven't got the promotions, and don't have the status, or I don't have the house." Although plenty of people do say that. So.
I don't think that either of us then are particularly down on the idea of middle age for ourselves.
Oh no, I love it.
Yeah, and I do think that's unusual. And the commonality between us there is being autistic, perhaps, and just being able to take things apart and connect them to feelings in a different way.
Yeah, and I also feel like there's like a readiness and an acceptance. So something about acceptance of the stage. Because I think that actually for a lot of autistic people, we feel so overwhelmed when we're children, maybe we're not quite ready to become teenagers. And then when we're teenagers, we're not quite ready to become adults.
God, that's true.
And it's like, no, I don't want to be 18 because I don't want to be an adult. I don't want to be 21, and there's that kind of, why, if we don't feel like we are there, then we don't want it foisted upon us. And, maybe if I didn't feel ready for any of those birthdays in a really profound way, like I still felt very overwhelmed or different to the other people that were turning those ages, then I didn't see them in the same way. Actually, to use that word again, maybe there was more of a dread. More will be expected of me, and I don't want to be leaving. I mean, I wanted to leave school because I didn't like school, but I didn't want to leave school because it was me out in the world not knowing how I would make my way.
That's really,
Something about this is I'm ready for it. It's been gradual, and like if you think maybe, and I'm casting back my mind now, but I wonder, maybe some people I was around when we came up to our 21st birthdays, maybe they were ready for it. They were looking forward to it. It meant something, and they could celebrate feeling like, oh, I'm really not a teenager. I'm really about on the brink of something.
Yeah.
I didn't feel that way, and 40 was still mothering and very, very busy and very, very, consumed with that for me. So I didn't feel like I was on the brink or ready for that to happen. I definitely didn't feel mature enough to be 40.
No.
But something now, even though I know that I don't look, like people will always say to me, I look much younger than I am.
That's true.
But actually there's something where finally at, half of 100, I feel like I can say, well, I am. I am.
Yes.
I don't have to apologise for it. I don't have to say, oh yeah, I look really young for my age, which is, there was almost like an apology that I would make. It was almost like, you're 20 something. Oh, you only look like you're about 19. Oh yeah, I look really young. And it felt like an apology for who I was. And it felt like I don't deserve to have 28, 29 years if I only look like 19, and I don't feel mature enough, and I have to apologise.
Yes.
Whereas now it's like, no, I am 50,
yes.
and I have 50 years done. Doesn't matter what I look like or what you put on me. I've put that time in, actually, and there might be more to me than what you see.
I don't know if you've ever said a whole bunch of quite different things that have resonated so strongly with me. And I don't know if I'll be able to hold on to them all to describe them, but there is absolutely something about being below, genuinely kind of feeling a much lower number in age than I have been always. Now, part of that is similar to you, that, and I don't know about now because I don't get that kind of feedback, but people were always surprised at how old I was. And now in my particular case, that would be because I'm a very short human male, and always, especially as a kid and an adolescent, I was seen as many years younger than I was. And it wasn't just my height, I just looked much younger. And so that was part of it. But also, of course, there's the part of just being scared of what being whatever age you might pick means. And we never ever feel ready. And you're right. And it's only now, just as you're describing, that I feel the age I am, but it's also that I feel the profession I am, which I never have done before. And I talk about that a lot. I have done for a few years now. It's the first time that when I say what I do, that feels like I'm talking about me. Whereas when I was a designer or a project manager, a producer, a journalist, and all my ADHD CV that I've got behind me, none of those things ever felt like me. They just felt like something I was pretending to do until I got found out. So and the same with my body shape now. It had nothing to do with not wanting to be overweight or not wanting to look a certain way. It's just that for me, my individual experience of this, not projecting on anybody else, was that there was this body that you see wearing something that just didn't feel like me, and that was an identity thing. Not talking about physiology, I'm not talking about anything about being a shape. I'm just talking about whether it felt real or not, and it didn't. Yeah. And now, of course, again, the same with neurodivergence. Now I know that this is what I am is supposed to be. It's not a failed something else. You know, the meme about it's better to know you're a zebra and not think you're a broken horse. And it's exactly that.
I do like zebras.
Yeah.
Anyway. Today, we've actually been really good at not going off on those kind of tangents.
Well, because they've all been so relevant, haven't they? To do with a solidifying of... So to me, it was these compartmentalized threads of identity that have all kind of stripped away, mostly. The work is never done. The things that didn't feel like me until I feel like me in most respects. So we have branched out because they're all different threads, but they are all really related. And I really would never have occurred to me until you framed it the way you have about being in your 50th year, that was my 50th year and beyond. That was really, really significant. Yeah. And one by one, all of the aspects of my identity have been unearthed or uncovered. I don't know, discovered. Doesn't matter what.
Yeah, all of those things. And I'm thinking, the thing that I was becoming aware of when I was talking was how the readiness was provided for me by there being templates. People had gone before. Strong women had spoken about perimenopause. Carl Jung and people like him had talked about middle age. And so if you go back to, autistic, our generation of autistic children, no one had ploughed that way. No one had talked about that. No one could give us that. And I guess that goes back to something you said in, might be the last episode that we released, because I remember it, so it's a recent edit, but you were saying, well, it would have made all the difference if that child, family psychologist, psychiatrist had said, yes, I know people like you, and here is what to expect, exactly. Or here is something. Then if we had that and we had a trajectory, then we can walk into it. Yes, this is me as an autistic person at 12. Yes. This is the chart I'm on. I don't mean all autistic people. I know you mean. I just mean that neither do I mean, by the way, that everybody's process of being a woman or being a middle age is the same either. These are generalized templates that can be really helpful for those of us that feel like we need some kind of a map. So the map is not the territory. No, but we need a map.
Lovely. That's lovely. That's lovely. I've not heard that phrase before.
Some kind of a map that we can refer to, and I think that's what has often been missing, and and that is now maybe there a little bit.
And you've squared the circle so beautifully there, because where did we start? We started by talking about allowing ourselves, you and I in different ways, expectations. That they're necessary, and that's what a map or a model or whatever would have been for younger versions of us, knowing that something like that does exist and that this is how it might go. And we didn't have that. We didn't have that.
Yes. And if somebody had have said to you, you are ADHD, therefore do not expect yourself to go into a career and stay in it for 50 years. You will have a portfolio career. You will have things that you will do at certain times, and then at other times, and at other times, and other times. Don't expect anything else. It's just the way it'll be. It's not failure. It's just what your makeup needs to do. And, maybe you will find something at some point that you'll do for a bit longer when you're in middle age. But if somebody had set you up for that... in your late teens, then what would have been. And if there had been certain rules that you had thought, as you did, I'm not staying in this long term, or I'm done with this. Well, that's okay. That's what I do. That's what my brain does. That's what I need.
Wonderful.
And I, just to make another comment about the year, I'm entering my 25th year of being a therapist.
Yeah.
So I am the anecdote to your to that description.
Yes.
That I get to stay in the same thing for that whole time against the odds. Siana here, just with a word correction. I mean, I'm the converse or the opposite, not the anecdote. That's a very idiosyncratic use of the word anecdote, and I know it doesn't really fit there.
And Autistic Numbers Leo then wants to say, so there's a lovely landmark there that very shortly, and I'm sure we can work out the actual date, you'll have been a therapist for longer than you weren't a therapist.
I saw my first client in the year 2000. Okay. If I knew what date that was, that would be a marker, because that'll be 25 years ago. So that's an interesting one, and that's why there's significance for me with these numbers as well, because 2000 was significant, and then 2025.
Of course.
And I was born in 1975. 25.
That's right.
So, yeah, that's all delights autistic me very much.
Me too.
Thank you for being with us, lovely listeners. I'll speak to you soon.
Yes. Speak to you next time. I'm never going to stop saying it. Speak to you next time, lovely listeners.
Well, maybe you're talking to the guests that we will see.
Oh yeah, all right then.
So
okay.
there,
them as
we
well.
we are going to see a couple more guests for some recordings in the early part of this year. We have done a couple of recordings, and you can expect those episodes maybe towards the end of January to come out. So that's very exciting.
It is. All right. On with 2025 then.
Yes, on with 2025. Goodbye.
Bye, bye, bye. Thank you for listening to the Autistic License podcast. You can connect with us via Instagram, Facebook at autisticlicense.com, or by email at autisticlicense@gmail.com. And we spell license the British way, LICENCE. We also have a thriving Facebook community. Search for Autistic License Siana and Leo, or click on the link in the show notes.